In Washington, D.C., the night had been quiet. Most Americans were asleep. The news cycle looked normal. Nothing suggested that history was about to shift. Then an unexpected message came from the White House. The sitting president of the United States, Donald J. Trump, appeared in a sudden video address to the nation.
A short time ago, the United States military began major combat operations in Iran. For 47 years, the Iranian regime has chanted death to America, targeting the United States, our troops, and the innocent people in many, many countries. Iran is the world's #1 state sponsor of terror and just recently killed tens of thousands of its own citizens on the street as they protested. For these reasons, the United States military is undertaking a massive and ongoing operation. We are going to destroy their missiles and raise their missile industry to the ground. It will be totally, again, obliterated. We're going to annihilate their Navy. We're going to ensure that the region's terrorist proxies can no longer destabilize the region or the world. So, lay down your arms. You will be treated fairly with total immunity, or you will face certain death.
Welcome to the Scanner Files. Right now, people across the internet are trying to understand a sudden military operation that appeared almost overnight. The name connected to the announcement is Operation Epic Fury, and within minutes, that name began spreading across television networks and social media platforms. News alerts appeared on phones around the world. Analysts began reacting on television. Online communities began searching for any sign that something had already begun. Within minutes, the internet started doing what it often does during moments like this. Radar tracking accounts opened their aircraft maps and began looking for unusual movements across the Middle East. Satellite observers started scanning the region for changes on the ground. Military analysts began comparing flight paths and naval activity. People began sharing maps, videos, and fragments of information as they tried to understand what might already be happening. This is how modern conflicts now enter the public conversation. Governments release official statements, but the internet begins investigating almost immediately. Civilian observers track aircraft using public radar data. Satellite images are compared and analyzed online. Videos recorded on phones begin circulating across social media. Piece by piece, people around the world begin trying to reconstruct events in real time. To understand why this announcement created such an immediate reaction, we need to look at the larger background behind it. For decades, the relationship between the United States and Iran has remained one of the most fragile rivalries in international politics. Military incidents, sanctions, and regional conflicts have repeatedly pushed the two countries close to confrontation. Most of the time, those tensions remain contained, but sometimes events begin moving faster than expected. When the announcement of Operation Epic Fury appeared, analysts immediately began asking the same question. Had something already started before the public even knew about it? Soon after the announcement, new pieces of information began appearing online. Videos posted on social media showed flashes in the sky above several locations in Iran. Some clips captured the sound of distant explosions. Others showed air defense systems activating during the night. Within minutes, those videos were circulating across multiple platforms as people tried to determine where they had been recorded. At the same time, radar tracking accounts began sharing maps showing unusual aircraft movements across the region. Large military planes appeared on public tracking systems moving toward the Middle East. Observers began comparing timestamps and flight paths. Some believed these movements might be connected to the operation that had just been announced. Others cautioned that radar data can sometimes be incomplete or misleading. Satellite observers also began watching closely. In recent years, civilian access to commercial satellite imagery has changed the way global events are monitored. Analysts and hobbyists alike now compare before and after images of locations around the world. Within hours, people online began asking whether new images might reveal signs of recent strikes or damaged infrastructure. As the investigation spread across the internet, another topic began appearing in the discussion. Several defense analysts pointed out that modern precision weapons often rely on advanced targeting systems. These systems combine satellite guidance, sensor data, and increasingly powerful software to guide missiles toward specific targets. Some observers began wondering whether artificial intelligence might now be playing a role in processing the vast amount of data used in modern warfare. The idea quickly captured attention online. Posts began circulating claiming that AI-assisted systems could analyze satellite imagery, radar signals, and battlefield data far faster than traditional methods. Supporters of the technology argue that these systems can improve accuracy and reduce unintended damage. Critics warn that increasing automation in warfare could also create new risks if systems behave in ways humans do not fully understand. While those debates continued, one thing remained clear: Operation Epic Fury had rapidly become more than a military announcement. It had become a global investigation unfolding across television networks, social media platforms, and online analysis communities. And as more information began appearing, observers around the world continued asking the same question: what exactly had begun with Operation Epic Fury? To understand why the announcement of Operation Epic Fury immediately captured global attention, we need to look at the larger context behind it. Because the tensions connected to this moment did not suddenly appear in 2026. For decades, the relationship between the United States and Iran has been shaped by confrontation, sanctions, and regional power struggles. Military incidents in the Persian Gulf, political disputes over nuclear development, and conflicts involving allied groups across the Middle East have repeatedly pushed the two countries close to dangerous moments. Over the years, these tensions created a fragile balance. Both sides accused the other of destabilizing the region. Economic sanctions placed pressure on Iran's economy, while Iran continued expanding its regional influence through allied groups and military partnerships. From time to time, small confrontations would occur at sea or in the air. Each incident raised fears that a larger conflict might eventually follow. Because of that history, analysts around the world reacted quickly when Operation Epic Fury was announced. Military experts began discussing what kind of operation it might be. Some suggested it could involve targeted strikes against military infrastructure. Others wondered whether it was intended as a limited show of force designed to send a message rather than start a prolonged war. At the same time, observers online continued examining the data appearing across the internet. Flight tracking maps showed increased military air traffic moving through the region. Naval activity in nearby waters also appeared to be changing. Satellite watchers began comparing previous images of suspected military facilities with the newest imagery becoming available. After the address, another detail from the announcement quickly became the center of the discussion. According to President Trump, the objective of Operation Epic Fury was not simply a limited strike or a symbolic show of force. The stated goal was to destroy Iran's nuclear weapons capability. For years, the question of Iran's nuclear program had been one of the most controversial issues in international politics. Western governments repeatedly warned that Iran could eventually develop nuclear weapons. Iranian officials insisted their nuclear program was intended for civilian energy production. Negotiations, sanctions, and international inspections attempted to manage the dispute for decades. But according to the announcement from Washington, the United States now believed that Iran was moving closer to the ability to build a nuclear weapon. In the address, Trump stated that the operation was intended to remove that capability before it could fully develop.
But Iran refused, just as it has for decades and decades. They've rejected every opportunity to renounce their nuclear ambitions, and we can't take it anymore.
That meant targeting facilities connected to nuclear research, enrichment, and related military infrastructure. Military analysts immediately understood the significance of that objective. Nuclear programs are not located in a single building. They are spread across laboratories, enrichment plants, storage sites, and research facilities. Destroying that capability would require identifying multiple locations connected to the program. That is why the president's statement that the operation had been planned for years attracted so much attention. Identifying and mapping nuclear infrastructure is one of the most complex intelligence tasks any military faces. It requires satellite surveillance, human intelligence, electronic monitoring, and years of analysis. If Operation Epic Fury was designed to dismantle Iran's nuclear capability, it meant that a long intelligence campaign had likely taken place before the first strike was ever launched. And once that possibility entered the discussion, another question quickly followed. Had the first phase of that plan already begun? To understand why the destruction of Iran's nuclear capability became such a central objective, we need to look back several years, because warnings about this exact scenario had already been circulating in Washington long before Operation Epic Fury was announced. More than a decade earlier, several American lawmakers had already raised concerns about Iran's nuclear ambitions. Among them was Senator Marco Rubio, who repeatedly argued that allowing Iran to reach nuclear weapons capability would dramatically change the balance of power in the Middle East. At the time, those warnings were part of a larger debate about how to deal with Iran's nuclear program.
Mr. President.
The senator from Florida.
Mr. President, I'll be brief. I know the senator from Tennessee would like to close on this matter. I think everything that needs to be said about the details of this deal have already been said. I do want to be recorded for history's purposes before I know what is going to happen in regards to this if it goes through. Iran will immediately use the money that it's receiving in sanctions relief to begin to build up its conventional capabilities. It will establish the most dominant military power in the region outside of the United States, and it will raise the price of us operating in the region. They're going to build anti-access capabilities, rockets capable of destroying our aircraft carriers and ships, continue to build these swift boats that are able to come on us, these fast boats that are able to swarm our naval assets. And they'll make it harder and harder for U.S. troops to be in the region. They'll also work with other terrorist groups in the region to target American servicemen and women. And they may or may not deny that they're involved, but they will target us and raise the price of our presence in the Middle East until they hope to completely pull us out of that region. They'll also continue to build long-range missiles, missiles capable of reaching the United States. Those are not affected by this deal, and they'll continue to build them as they've been doing. And then at some point in the near future, when the time is right, they will build a nuclear weapon. And they will do so because at that point they will know that they have become immune, that we will no longer be able to strike their nuclear program because the price of doing so will be too high. This is not just a work of imagination. It exists in the world today. It's called North Korea, where a lunatic possesses dozens of nuclear weapons and a long-range rocket that can already reach the United States. And we cannot do anything about it. An attack on North Korea today would result in an attack on Tokyo, or Seoul, or Guam, or Hawaii, or California. And so the world must now live with a lunatic in possession of nuclear weapons. And this is the goal Iran has as well, to reach a point where they become immune to any sort of credible military threat because the price of a military strike would be too high. And then they become an established nuclear weapons power. And never in the history of the world has such a regime ever possessed weapons so capable of destruction. Iran is led by a supreme leader who is a radical Shia cleric with an apocalyptic vision of the future. He is not a traditional geopolitical actor who makes decisions on the basis of borders or simply history or because of ambitions. He has an religious apocalyptic vision of the future, one that calls for triggering a conflict between the non-Muslim world and the Muslim world, one that he feels especially obligated to trigger. And he's going to possess nuclear weapons. This is the world that we are on the verge of leaving our children to inherit. And perhaps we ourselves will have to share in it. And so I want to be recorded for history's purposes, if nothing else, to say that those of us who opposed this deal understood where it would lead. And we are making a terrible mistake. And I fear that a passage of this deal will make it even harder for us to prevent it. And I hope that there is still time to change our minds. But here's the good news. Iran may have a supreme leader, but America does not. In this nation, we have a republic, and soon we will have new leaders, perhaps in this chamber, but also in the executive branch. And I pray that on their first day in office, they will reverse this deal and reimpose the sanctions and back them up with a credible threat of military force, or history will condemn us for not doing what needed to be done at this critical moment in the world's history. I yield the floor.
Some leaders believed diplomacy and international inspections could prevent Iran from developing nuclear weapons. Others argued that if the program continued unchecked, it could eventually lead to a much larger conflict. For years, the issue remained at the center of international negotiations, sanctions, and intelligence monitoring. The question was always the same. Could Iran's nuclear program be stopped through diplomacy, or would it eventually require military action? And now, according to the announcement from Washington, that moment had arrived. After the earlier U.S. strikes in 2025, many analysts believed Iran's nuclear program had been severely damaged. American B-2 bombers had dropped massive bunker-buster bombs on several nuclear enrichment facilities, including sites at Fordow and Natanz. U.S. officials said the attacks had pushed Iran's nuclear ambitions back by years, but the story did not end there. According to intelligence officials and defense analysts, Iran continued rebuilding parts of its nuclear infrastructure in the months that followed. Monitoring systems, satellite surveillance, and intelligence reports suggested that the program had not completely disappeared. And that is the moment when Operation Epic Fury begins to make more sense, because if Iran's nuclear capability had survived the earlier strikes, the objective of Epic Fury would be very different. It would not be the first attempt to stop the program, it would be the second. If Iran still retained the ability to rebuild its nuclear program, the earlier strikes might only have delayed the problem rather than eliminating it. Preventing a nuclear weapon would require more than a single attack. It would require dismantling the entire network that supported the program. This is where Operation Epic Fury begins to take shape. According to statements from the administration, the objective of the operation was not simply to damage individual facilities. The goal was to eliminate Iran's nuclear weapons capability completely by targeting the infrastructure that made the program possible. That meant identifying laboratories, enrichment sites, command centers, and military installations connected to the nuclear program. These locations were often protected by air defense systems and in some cases built underground to survive conventional attacks. Destroying them would require careful planning and coordination. And according to President Trump's statement, that planning had already been underway for years. Which means that when the announcement appeared in the early hours of March 1st, the operation itself may have already been in motion. In less than a week, the situation has already changed dramatically. What began with a sudden announcement from Washington has turned into one of the most closely watched military operations in recent history. Reports from military officials say multiple strategic targets across Iran have been struck. Facilities connected to the nuclear program have been hit, and key elements of Iran's military infrastructure have suffered major damage. According to statements released during the first days of the operation, the Iranian leadership structure was also targeted. Reports indicate that the supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, was killed during the strikes along with a large number of senior military commanders. Several generals connected to Iran's defense structure were reportedly eliminated as command centers were struck. Military briefings also described major losses across Iran's strategic capabilities. Parts of the country's naval forces were reportedly destroyed, including submarines and elements of the fleet operating in the Persian Gulf. Air defense systems and sections of the Iranian Air Force were also targeted in the opening phases of the campaign. These systems had long been designed to protect the country's most sensitive military and nuclear facilities. If those reports prove accurate, the scale of the operation would represent one of the most decisive opening phases of a military campaign in modern history. The objective, according to officials, was not territorial control, but the removal of a specific threat: Iran's ability to develop nuclear weapons. That objective may explain another detail that analysts are watching closely. So far, the operation has relied almost entirely on air power, naval assets, and long-range precision weapons. There have been no reports of American ground troops entering Iranian territory. Modern warfare increasingly relies on remote strike capabilities, intelligence systems, and precision targeting rather than traditional large-scale invasions. If the operation ends without the deployment of ground forces, it could become one of the shortest major conflicts of the modern era. Military strategists have long debated whether advanced technology could allow large strategic objectives to be achieved without prolonged wars on the ground. Operation Epic Fury may become one of the first real tests of that idea. But even as the first week of the operation closes, many questions remain. Conflicts rarely end as quickly as they begin. Regional tensions are still high, allies and adversaries are watching closely, and the long-term consequences of this operation are still impossible to predict. What happens next will determine whether Operation Epic Fury becomes a brief military campaign or the beginning of a much larger chapter in the history of the region. For now, the world is watching, and the file remains open. This has been the Scanner Files, scanning the world for anomalies. Until next time,